Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session of the 2021 STM Spring Conference, which goes by the title, Let's Fix This, what Article 17 of the EU Copyright Directive means for article sharing. I'm Claudia Russo. I'm a Regional Manager for EU Public Affairs for STM. And I'm pleased to be joined today for the session by Mathilde Renaud, who's a Legal Counsel to STM, Esther Oever, Business Development Manager at Mendeley, and Dan O'Brien, Assistant Director of Publication Technologies at the American Chemical Society, ACS. Thanks all for joining. They all have an impressive background, really, but especially to being regular members of the dedicated group of within STM who's been working on the project that we're going to present to you today. So they're really amongst the best people to present. They've been closer to the EU Copyright Directive in the beginning, and then they've been involved in the building of the article sharing framework, which we're really excited to launch today. So in order, Mathilde will first take a step back and look at what Article 17 of the Copyright Directive is, why it matters to publishers. Esther will then explain what the framework is, going a little bit more in the detail of how it came about, and then we'll show how it actually works in practice and what is expected of publishers. I won't say much more. Before I leave you with them, just a couple of things. Mathilde will be the first one presenting, just because she's going a little bit into the legal details of Article 17. We'll just pause for a couple of minutes after her presentation to check whether there are any questions already by then. So feel free to submit any in the Q&A box. And then another thing, I will ask Joe to launch a quick poll so that we can get a first impression of what people know already of the Copyright Directive. So there you go. And the question reads, is your organization aware of Article 17 and your obligations for rights holders and platforms that come with it? I see that people are responding, so we'll just give a couple of seconds as results come in. So that we can see who's with us today, and hopefully there will be something new for everybody. 50% has come in so far. Yeah. There we go. So we have a 49%. I'm just checking that you can see the results as well, but we have a yes for 49% of people already, so that's really good. No, 13%, and not sure for 38%. So we'll see where we end up with the end of the session today. But so this is really helpful. It was just a couple of words from me, but I'll stop here and invite the others to take the floor and dive into this. So Mathilde, first to you. Take it away.
Thanks, Claudia. Now let me share my screen. Okay, you can see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. So thanks for the time for presenting this short presentation. So what I'm going to do today is to present to you in a very short presentation what is Article 17 of the copyright in the DSM directive, and how and why it is relevant for the STM publishers. So before we are going there, perhaps as you all know already, the copyright in the DSM directive that I'm going to refer as of now as the DSM directive has been adopted in April 2019 and will enter into force this year on the 7th of June. So this directive contains a wide number of provisions pertaining to copyright, and Article 17 is one of them. So what is it about this Article 17? So as you can see in the title of the slide, it is about the use of protected content by online content sharing service providers So I know it's an horrible name, or now we call them the OCSSP. And as of now, I will refer to them as platform for the purpose of this presentation. But just as you, so that you know, this article does not pertain to any online platforms that is in the internet, but only to a subset of it. And I will go and tell you more on that in the next slide. So why is this Article 17 relevant? So for all right holders really and platforms, but also especially for STM publishers. We have seen that in recent years, we have an increasing number of platforms. So as you all have seen, the platform economy has taken a huge place in our life, not just for copyright, but in our life generally in the past decade. And now we have a number of platforms that is providing access to a large amount of copyrighted work. This includes also the STM publishing industry, and to such a point that in some sectors, it has become a main source, if not the main source of access to content online. So while those platforms can really increase the access to culture or to science in our case, they also come with challenge when especially the content is uploaded by their users without the authorization of the right holders. So in a very few short words, before the Article 17, there was a lot of uncertainty with how to deal with those kind of platforms and whether they were actually performing a copyright act or whether they would be liable. So in the previous system, they were trying to hide under what we call a so-called closed safe harbor. So for the first time, the directive recognized that these platforms are now responsible for the content that is uploaded by their users and to which they give access to the public. So what does that mean? It means it offers a really great opportunity for right holders, and that includes STM publishers, to gain back control on their content and to really establish a cooperation with this type of platform. As I said already, there are, of course, a number of platforms in the STM publishing sector. To this day, I think we interact with more or less 40 platforms, some of which are owned by publishers, and of course, some are not. So as of the 7th of June, those platforms, all the platforms that qualify under the directive, need to comply with the obligation of Article 17. And I'm going to present to you more in detail what does that mean. So first, before we go into explaining a little bit how Article 17 is articulated, I'm getting back on the definition of the platforms I'm talking about, so the famous online content sharing service providers, to which I refer as platform for the purpose of this presentation. So as I said, those OCSSPs, those platforms, are only a subset of all the online platforms that exist. So to enter into the scope of Article 17, this directive, there needs first to be an information society service provider. So this is a very big umbrella term that is used commonly in European legislation for like more than 20 years now. And so it refers to the provision of electronic services mostly. And the most important criteria for this is that this platform needs to give access, or the main purpose is to give access to the public to a large amount of copyrighted content that is uploaded by its users and that it organizes and promotes for profit makings. So that could be, you know, organizing, promoting, indexing, even incentivizing, why not, the further upload of its users. So as for all definition in the directive, there are exclusions, and for the purpose of this presentation, I'm providing only a few examples. The most relevant for us probably is that not-for-profit online encyclopedia and not-for-profit educational and scientific repositories are excluded from the scope of this directive. So how does that work, Article 17? So for this part, I'm going to focus only on the relevant part of Article 17. knowing that Article 17 in total is like 10 subparagraphs and is a very complex thing. But to make it simple, I would say it is divided in three main parts for us. So the first part is, as I said in the first slide, for the first time, the directive recognizes that those platforms are liable for the content they host and they give access to the public. So this is commonly referred as being liable for an act of communication to the public. There are two mechanisms under it that are of interest for us. The second one being the most relevant. There is a licensing mechanism and a liability mechanism. Why is that? It's because Article 17 is made to deal with a lot of different situations in the creative sectors and the copyright sector. So there is a licensing mechanism where a platform can go and obtain a license for the use of the right holder's content, and that would cover the content uploaded by its users. But of course, it's not always possible to obtain a license and to conclude it with a platform for a variety of reasons. And one of the biggest one is, for example, for right holders that also include STM publishers. It is not always in their best interest to conclude license with platform because this is not in line with their business model, and that could, of course, create a prejudice with the commercial interest of this business model. So the second mechanism, which is the one that we are interested into today, is the liability mechanism. So when there is no license, so either there is no license or it's not possible to conclude it, then there is that liability mechanism that kicks in. And the starting point is to recognize that those platforms is presumed liable for the content unless they can demonstrate best effort. So I'm going to explain to you in the next slide what does that mean. But it's important to get back on one of the goals of Article 17. Why is there a liability mechanism? Because one of the goals, of course, is to ensure protection for right holders and to allow them to determine whether and under which condition their content is used. So that is nothing new, really, in the copyright world, where we can, of course, enjoy exclusive right and enjoy the protection of exclusive rights. But it was important to have a liability mechanism that we're going to present further to make sure that the content, that right holders can choose how to better deal with their content. So for that liability mechanism to work, so the platforms that are presumed liable for the notarized content uploaded by their users, they are liable unless demonstrate their best effort in three cumulative conditions. So first, they still need to demonstrate they made best effort to obtain a license. The second condition is, and the one that we are going to develop further today, is that they need to demonstrate best effort to ensure the availability of content for which the right holders, that include STM publisher, for example, for STM platforms, have provided the relevant and necessary information. And the third condition is that they need to have demonstrated they acted expeditiously, so quickly, if they received the substantive notice to disable access and remove content. And they also further have to prevent the future occurrence of content to happen on their platform. So in the second part, which the one we are focusing on today, there is two key concepts, is the concept of best effort and relevant necessary information. So the best effort is a very high standard of obligation on platform. It means that it's not like an obligation of result, but then basically needs to leave no stone unturned. So as the directive says, it's in accordance with our industry standard of professional diligence. And what's important and why I talk about best effort is because this is very central to that liability mechanism. And in our case, it is triggered when the right holder is giving the relevant and necessary information. So what does that mean, relevant and necessary information? This is not defined into the directive, but this is something that has to be assessed sector by sector, even subsector by subsector. So for example, to give you an example, for other sectors that could be giving information into a file that could be providing fingerprint, watermarks, metadata, and in some case, even a catalog of content to a platform so they can decide and make their best efforts. So the bottom line, this is where I want to go. What does that mean? So if the platform failed to demonstrate its best effort, it is liable. But conversely, if the right holder does not provide the relevant and necessary information, the platform cannot demonstrate its best effort and therefore cannot be liable. There is a caveat to that, is that, of course, there would be liable if they fail to demonstrate best effort if a right holder is sending, a notice, a substantiated notice. So why it is important to focus on this part of Article 17 and what does that mean for us today? The important thing is, like, of course, we all see that the burden is on the platform, but this mechanism encourages the cooperation between right holders and the platforms to address the issue of unauthorized content uploaded by users, but in a preemptive way, so before it happens. And what it is important as well is that they do not mandate a specific mean to do so. So today, my colleagues are going to present to you a way of doing it in the STM publisher world. So this is a sector-specific approach, a subsector-specific approach, I would even say, and it has to be case by case. So it means as well that the recourse to notices, for example, to take down content is not touched by this mechanism. So this is also something important. But by using preemptively, like metadata, APIs, and other type of solution, we can address the issue of illegal content in a rationalized, streamlined, and almost a real-time way. So it helps to protect the content proactively and preventively. We also have to say that even so notice and take down and stay down already exist, this solution would offer a lot of certainty for publishers also, because of course notice and take down, for example, is something that happened after the fact. So after the damage has been caused for the right holder. So the incentive of Article 17 is that we can address that preventively. So in the STM publishing sector too, as soon as Article 17 enters into force, the academic platforms have to demonstrate best effort when the STM publishers have provided the relevant and necessary information. So this is all I wanted to say, and then my colleague Esther and Dad are going to take you further into the solution offered today.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Martin. I think it's really interesting to see Article 17 in this sector and then a bit contextualized and seen as to what it means exactly for the STM sector. And to that effect, we do have one question that was asked already. And that is whether you can give any example of some platforms in the sector that will be categorized as OSSPs. We know that this is quite new, and as you were saying, things are going to work very much on a case-by-case basis. But if you can offer any thoughts, any comments on this.
So what's important is really to take the criteria I presented into account. So if you have a platform in the STM publishing world, and the main purpose, or one of the main purposes, is to share content that has been uploaded by users. So in this case, that could be a scientific network that allows their users to share articles online on their platforms. And then the second important thing is that this platform needs to make it for a commercial purpose, if you wish. So, I mean, probably the most obvious example we have nowadays would be ResearchGate and academia, for example. Those would be examples in the STM publishing sectors, but it could also be platforms owned by publishers already, or platforms with whom publishers are collaborating. So voilà.
Perfect. I think this gives an idea, and then maybe we can go more into details later as we have the final Q&A session. But then thank you very much. And I think I can leave it to you, Esther.
Okay, let's see, share my screen. Share. So, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can. Okay.
Perfect. So thanks very much, Mathilde, and hello everyone. We are very pleased to be here to tell you about the article sharing framework. STM Stack Group, as well as some NISO members, have put a lot of time and effort into developing the article sharing framework. I will first provide a high-level overview of the framework, and then Dan will then follow to demonstrate the how. As Mathilde just shared, Article 17 presents an opportunity for rights holders, so academic publishers, and platforms to work together to enable the safe use of copyright protected content and to ensure a better experience for platform users. Now, although the bulk of responsibility lies with the platforms, Article 17 puts an onus upon publishers to supply platforms with relevant and necessary information. This so platforms can fulfill their obligation on the upload of protected works. To ensure the publishing industry meets its obligation to platforms, STM assembled a working group under STEC to develop the technical processes needed. These processes are described in the article sharing framework. It is important to note that the framework is not a solution that platforms can plug in. The framework is an implementation guide, an industry standard that describes how publishers can provide the relevant and necessary information and how platforms can utilize it. Allow me also to emphasize right away that the article sharing framework is not an upload filter. The information platforms obtain through the framework enable them to share content in a legally compliant way. Ultimately, it will be up to the platform to decide as to whether to allow the upload of an article or not. There's nothing in the operation of the framework that can technically prevent this happening, and so there's no automated blocking. Now, what constitutes the relevant and necessary information that publishers are required to provide under Article 17? And for this, we need to consider researchers' sharing habits. So the different article versions they share, the different motivations they may have to share, the different platforms they choose to share their articles on, and publishers having specific policies for each context. In light of this, platforms require tools to easily identify the article version, and subsequently the applicable sharing policies for a given article version. This to determine article shareability. The trick here is for publishers to ensure this information is provided in a machine actionable form so that platforms can obtain and act on the information automatically and in real time. Fortunately, our industry has always made and is still making significant investments in preparing for and sustaining our industry in this digital world. And so our industry's technical infrastructure and practices provided for a solid foundation. So the framework is the industry standard for providing the information required under Article 17. Let me briefly zoom in on the scope of the framework. The framework has been designed for platforms covered by the new obligations set by Article 17. So this concerns these online content sharing service providers, or OCSSPs, that Mathilde talked about already. And these platforms are typically commercial in nature and that make available large amounts of content to the public. The policies expressed through the framework are therefore focused on these platform types specifically. And as such, this excludes personal blogs, websites, as well as institutional repositories. These are explicitly not in scope. The DOI and the journal article version metadata can be embedded in any journal article PDF really. But as part of the framework, publishers are required to deposit sharing policy indicators for content that typically does not bear a Creative Commons license. As such, the framework applies specifically to subscription and open archive material. However, as the framework builds on existing industry standards, this means that when platforms would look for the sharing indicators, they would look at the same metadata section in Crossref as they would to identify Creative Commons licenses. Publishers decide themselves whether they will make the relevant and necessary information available for their front files or for their back files too. though first focus may be on getting this up and running for new content, as this is what researchers share most. It is incredibly important to keep matters manageable for platforms and to make it attractive for them to implement the framework. And they want that would happen if we enable them to automatically implement and use the information that publishers provide. Given that there are over 5,000 academic publishers worldwide, and with that a likelihood of a huge variety in sharing policies, having those publishers coalesce around a limited set of policies is of great importance and value. So for publishers, platforms, and researchers. Also, many publishers have yet to define their sharing policies, or they may want to revisit what they've got currently. And many may want to use this opportunity to align their policies with what prevails in the industry. Being able to choose from a set of policies that have been carefully defined by colleague publishers may be really helpful for this. And although the STM sharing policies are limited in number, publishers can be reassured that they offer flexibility for every publisher to set a wide range of policies. This includes the ability to set different policies for accepted manuscripts and the version of record, or for sharing publicly versus for collaboration in research working groups. So the framework is scalable to a variety of sharing contexts. This, however, also means that the framework will not allow for custom policies to be expressed. That would weaken its value and potential. For the article sharing framework to work, publishers are required to embed additional metadata into places where they include this already. That is in the article PDF and Crossref. As such, the costs incurred are expected to be limited and likely mostly related to labor required to set up the initial processes that thereafter are fully automated. For platforms, on the other hand, the following elements are needed. So software to extract metadata from the article PDFs, which is typically available open source, and access to Crossref's metadata API. This API is available free of charge, yet for a better performant API, one is required to pay a modest fee. However, it's not expected that platforms suddenly need this better performant API in light of the framework to work. The article sharing framework is a result of a cross-community collaboration. STAC members have been able to find an elegant and relatively simple solution to a complex problem without having to build new technical infrastructure. The framework is built upon two existing and adopted standards, this being the NISO Journal Article Versions Recommended Practice from 2008 and the NISO Article License Indicators Practice from 2015. Also, it involves Crossref, and we expect that this then will ease any challenges of implementation. This also means that the article sharing framework is an agreed standard specific to our industry, as it considers some unique aspects of academic publishing, for instance, the sharing of different article versions, the sharing purpose, so whether it's in collaboration groups or for public access, as well as in light of the infrastructure it's built on. And by the way, as this is all about enabling responsible sharing, implementing the framework is a logical next step for those parties that endorse the STM voluntary principles for article sharing. The development work for the article sharing framework is now in its final stages. An update to the NISO ALI recommended practice will soon be made available to NISO members for review. And based on this, Crossref will update its XML deposit scheme. Today, we announced the framework as we are keen to engage with publishers and platforms outside this STAC working group. And therefore, we will organize informative webinars and hands-on workshops as of May going forward. This to build recognition and support for the framework and naturally to ensure a successful rollout across our industry. If you're interested to participate, then please join or encourage your colleagues to join. An agenda will be made available on the STM website soon. Although the framework results from a working group under STM, it by no means is meant for use by an implementation by STM members only, and we've therefore reached out to sister associations as well. And therefore, we are also pleased to have been accepted for a poster session on SSP's May conference. Let me therefore also stress that everyone is welcome to join the webinars and workshops that we will be organizing, be they STM members or non-members. Any information and documentation around the framework is available on the STM website, And this includes, for instance, the integration guide, FAQs, a protocol for platforms, etc. And more information will be added in the course of this and next week. To round off, I would like to mention a few things about the framework that I'm very keen for you to remember. The framework is simple and pragmatic. All information provided is machine identifiable, and as such can be easily implemented and used by platforms to check article shareability automatically in real time. Also, it is scalable and it can be implemented at low or zero cost, and it is available to anyone who wants to make use of it. The framework is built using existing industry technology and practices. And despite limited in number, the STM sharing policies enable publishers to set the policies precisely the way they want for their content. As publishers rally around this limited set of policies, it ensures implementation by platforms is manageable, and that is of great importance. Also, as part of the article sharing framework, platforms will obtain all sharing options for a given article version, which means that platforms could also identify alternative sharing options should they want it. Either way, the information provided through the framework is always clear-cut and unambiguous. And lastly, as also mentioned at the beginning, the framework is not an upload filter. Platforms choose themselves whether or not to use the information obtained through the framework. The framework cannot prevent that from happening. Now, I would now like to hand over to Dan to let him show you some high-level insights into the how of the article sharing framework for both publishers and platforms.
Thank you, Esther. Well done. Let me share my deck here. Okay, can you see my my screen? Excellent. Okay. As Esther and Matilda presented, I'm going to talk through the implementation for publishers and platforms for the article sharing framework. I'm Dan O'Brien from the American Chemical Society, and thanks for having me here today. At its core, its essence, the publisher will deposit information into Crossref and add information into the PDF, as Esther explained. This is the relevant and necessary information that Matilda mentioned. And as I go through my slides, my references to platform are essentially going to be equivalent to what Matilda mentioned as OC SSPs. Publishers will put in machine-readable information into the article PDF and into Crossref for platforms to retrieve. As mentioned before, this is a framework for adding automated solutions, and it's not a pre-built application or a tool to download and install, but it's a set of services and technologies that's available to use and implement in automation. So publishers will add article identifiers to the PDF. Many publishers are doing this already. Publishers will also start depositing sharing policy indicators to Crossref. And many publishers are already doing something similar for public use licenses today. Platforms, in turn, will extract that article identifier information from the PDF and use it to do a lookup into Crossref. We're going to examine each of these a little bit one by one. So there's two fields that publishers need to add, if they're not adding already, to the article PDF, the article DOI and the article version. I'm going to refer that to JAV going forward here. And more on JAV, it's a NISO recommended practice. Many publishers may be already familiar with JAV. There are several versions defined by NISO here. This framework is using three of them: version of record, accepted manuscript, and the author original. So here's a screenshot of an XMP block from a PDF. There's two methods publishers can use to add this information to a PDF. One is added to the PDF's XMP block. I saw a question earlier in the chat about what if older PDFs don't support XMP. We'll get to that. There's a second encoding method that publishers can use. But if you squint real hard, you can see in green highlight here is the DOI that's expressed in the XMP for this article. And there's also the JAF, version of record is identified. So that's method one. Second way to encode this information into the PDF is to add the JAF to a DOI hyperlink in the article PDF. This is a screenshot of a ACS article, and if you zoom into the bottom right corner, there is a DOI hyperlink there. And if one hovers over that DOI hyperlink, there's actually more information encoded in that link that then is displayed. There's the DOI and also the JAV. It's not important that the JAV is carried back to the publisher if someone clicks on the link. What's important here is that the JAV is present in the PDF to be extracted later by the platform. This method was added as a failsafe because we found that it's not uncommon for the XMP to get lost along the way by the time a PDF is loaded to a platform. Publishers should implement at least one of these methods. ACS is doing both of them. Time for a poll. Publishers, are you implementing any XMP metadata into the PDF of your articles today? Joe, if you wouldn't mind, put the poll up. And examples of this could include, there we are. Examples of metadata could include article title, author names, copyright statements, keywords. Also, some publishers have already implemented adding a DOI there as well. So we'll let that go in a couple more seconds. Let's close that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the results, hey, a fair amount, almost 60% are already putting information into the XMP. So it's not a heavy lift to add a couple more fields there. Okay, publishers can add information at 2 points in their production lifecycle. Once when the PDF is created, they could add the DOI and the JAF to the XMP or to the PDF. Alternately, the publishers could add it at the point of delivery. So right when the PDF is requested by an end user, that information could be injected in real time. Publishers can choose. Either one is fine. ACS is doing a combination of both. For newly published content, we're adding that information to the PDF upon generation. But we didn't want to go back and process a bunch of older files. So for older files, we're injecting it at the time of delivery. Time for another poll. Publishers, are you already implementing DOI and JAV tagging in your article PDFs today? And Joe, if you could put up that poll, great, thank you. A number of publishers have begun doing this a few years ago. I know Elsevier, Wiley, Springer Nature, Taylor & Francis, AIP, ACS, and others. Let's close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And it looks like we have 40, getting closer to 50% publishers already adding these fields to the PDF. That's great. This is the first start, publishers. If you can go off and do this today and start adding information to your PDFs and be ready for this framework. Okay, next part is adding sharing policy indicators to Crossref. As Esther mentioned, there are different sharing contexts that this framework defines. Each context has a few different options. And each combination of contexts, each set of permutations results in one sharing policy. Each policy has a unique identifier. It's a DOI. It's a sharing policy DOI. So on this page, you see an extract of up to 48 different permutations. So there's up to 48 different sharing policy DOIs that can be used. In this example, Elsevier and ACS have mapped their house sharing policies to the STM article sharing framework indicators. We're not going to dive into the details of these tables, but just look at the amount of green and compare between the two publishers. Elsevier is allowing sharing in more contexts. Therefore, they have more policy identifiers to use to express those sharing contexts. ACS has less green and less sharing policies. It's important to remember we're focused here on subscription articles. So once a publisher has identified which combination of sharing contexts map to their particular use case, then they'll start including those sharing policy identifiers in their Crossref deposits. This is the same Crossref structure that many publishers are already using to assert public use licenses, such as a Creative Commons. Time for another poll. Publishers, anybody already depositing license ref metadata to Crossref? If you're supporting Chorus, you're probably already doing this. Thank you, Joe. Can't believe, I think Chorus started in 2014, thereabouts. It's been going strong for a while. We just had a working group earlier this week. The howcanishare.com site also uses this metadata from the license ref. And it will close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thanks, Joe. Hey, that's great. It looks like we have a fair amount of publishers already depositing this information into Chorus. So again, this framework makes use of the same metadata, the same licensed metadata area in Crossref that many publishers are already using. Onto the platform. Platforms in reverse will look at the PDF and extract the DOI and the JAV using either method, looking for metadata in both places. So publishers put the data in, platforms extract it out. Free libraries can be used to extract this information, Apache, PDF Box, etc. And to establish feasibility, ACS has developed a proof of concept that implements this, shows how to extract the metadata from both methods. So the platform will use these identifiers that they extracted from the PDF and perform a lookup into Crossref to determine if any sharing policies are defined. This orange box can simulate what a platform may have extracted from a PDF, an article DOI, and a JAV. The JAV is one of the sharing contexts, and a platform will figure out the other 3 sharing contexts. Have they signed or not signed the voluntary principles of article sharing? Who are they wanting to share the content with, and what are they trying to share, full text or something else. So this combination would determine which policy indicator they're looking for. They'll use the combination of the article DOI and the sharing policy identifier to do a lookup into Crossref. And if the platform finds a match, if that sharing policy identifier is in Crossref, then the article can be shared. If the platform has a different scope, different sharing scope, and it results in a different policy identifier, such as 001 in this case, that's not listed in this article's record in Crossref. So the platform will conclude that can't be shared for this context. It's a simple binary yes/no answer for the platforms. So to recap, the relevant and necessary information that publishers put into the article PDF and into Crossref enables the platforms to look up and determine the sharing policy identifiers within Crossref. We have some resources we're putting out on the STM webpage. We have an ASF subsite that we've defined. There's an implementation guide out there now, a policy and information and lookup tool. It's a spreadsheet, and coming soon as an FAQ. And I want to acknowledge the contributions of a lot of people who helped us get this far. Thank you to Vincent, Miriam, Evan, Jeff, Patricia, Todd, Nettie, Jeff, Matt, and everybody involved in the subgroups that we've been working in. Thank you. With that, I think we're open to questions.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much all. I think this was very dense, especially in this last section. But I also saw that a couple of very technical questions are coming in, so probably you've got an audience there, Dan. Shall we start from these technical questions maybe? I see, for instance, one, and someone is asking, are OA and repository versions identified in the XMP? I don't know if you've got this, Dan.
So OA articles would likely have a public use license that also would be expressed in Crossref through a license ref tag. So that the article sharing framework makes use of that same area in Crossref. But I think it's up to a publisher whether they also put that into the PDF.
Okay. And I see another one asking which sharing platforms are set up to honor the article sharing protocols and to what extent?
So I don't, go ahead, Esther.
So I wanted to say that the reason for us to now announce the article sharing framework to the industry is because exactly we want to engage with parties outside the STEC working groups, including more platforms, to talk about the framework and encourage them to implement it. I can say that on the Elsevier side, Mendeley would be interested in implementing the framework. I mean, since we acquired Mendeley in 2013, Mendeley has always positioned itself as a publisher respecting and publisher neutral platform. So we've signed the principles, the STM principles for article sharing. We've implemented distributed usage logging and anything else we can do to make Mendeley a good party in the in our ecosystem. We will consider. So as soon as that becomes available, we will use this information. That said, we also have a preprint server, so for instance, SSRN, and for them, it will be very, very helpful to use the information embedded in the PDF, so the JAV details, to ensure that any accepted manuscripts or version of record don't slip through the current compliance check nets and end up on our platform. And it's only preprints that go up. So yes, it's Mendeley and SSRN are definitely committed to this already as soon as that becomes available to them. And we are very keen on getting in touch with other platforms to talk about the framework.
And because you mentioned them, and I saw a question popping up in the chat earlier, and then you answered in writing, but maybe it's helpful if we repeat that. Something was asked about the relationship between the ASF, the article sharing framework, and the STM voluntary principles for article sharing. Can you maybe say a couple of things about that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really nice question that was asked. In principle, there's no direct relationship or so, but it is, I think that in a way, back in 2015, the industry was already wrapping their heads around what those sharing networks mean to researchers and how we would like to work together with those platforms to enable responsible sharing of copyrighted content. So in that sense, this is just a really logical next step for those parties that have endorsed the principles. We have this built into the framework in such a way that to determine platform type, we distinguish between those platforms that have signed the principles and are compliant with it and those that are not. And that is because some publishers are prepared to give additional sharing permissions for use of those platforms that have signed the principles. However, and I really want to stress that sign up to the principles is not a prerequisite for using, picking up and implementing the framework in the first place. Any platform out there can use the framework. It's just that if you are a signatory to the principles, you might benefit of additional sharing permissions.
I think that's really helpful to clarify. So thanks for that. And maybe we have a couple of questions for Mathilde instead. I read one: how, if at all, might fair use rights be asserted in the context of the ASF implementation? Or is there no instance where these could be fair use?
Yes, thanks. In Europe, we do not have fair use really, but the Article 17, as it is phrased in the directive, provides for member states to implement a set of exception for user-generated content or uploaded content, and strictly for the purpose of Article 17. And those exceptions are for quotation, criticism, review, or for the purpose of caricature, parody, or pastiche. So now, as it stands, the ISF, as Esther has said already, is not an upload filter, and the ISF is not in any way going to prevent any of this.
Okay, and then still staying with you for another couple of seconds, I saw a question at the very beginning of Esther's presentation asking how this is all going to relate to the UK with Brexit happening, and what's going to be applicable there or not so.
Okay, so of course in the UK, especially with Brexit, obviously, the entire DSM directive is not going to be implemented in the UK. So the obligations that are under Article 17 are in principle not applicable in the UK as well. But we can also envisage that there is a variety of situations. One of the obvious being that if a business is from the UK but has an establishment in the EU, then it will need to comply with the obligation of Article 17. That said, the directive does not specifically contain jurisdictional rules for Article 17, but then it is presumed that as we have like general regulation for that, that jurisdictional and applicable law that are commonly used apply there.
Great. good. Thanks also for that. I see coming up again another, one other thought. Maybe this is for Esther. I think Esther, but let's see. So someone's asking, do you have any thoughts or use cases about how libraries might benefit from the ASF to, for example, populate institutional repositories?
Yeah, that's a nice question again. I mean, the current focus of the framework is really on the OCSSPs. So those type of platforms are in scope of Directive of Article 17. So if publishers want to express their permissions for the use of and for the upload of content to institutional repositories, that would probably be a phase 2 thing, because the permissions for such platforms are quite different for permissions for typical platforms that are now in scope, so the commercial platforms. But yeah, as said, we would be very keen to get conversations going with platforms, including institutional repositories, on perhaps on what we could do with them, and if there are any interesting things that we could do there. But right now, the focus is on OCSSPs.
Thank you. I see that we're well ahead of time, but we might just want to still stay with this a couple of minutes longer and answer a few more questions, a couple to start with, and then see whether anyone else wants to still have any doubts addressed from our audience. So one question that I think might be coming up in several occasions is whether publishers need to provide anything to platforms directly, or whether everything would go through Crossref. If maybe Dan, maybe you have an answer to this?
Sure. Yeah, there is no direct feed or information conveyed directly to platforms from a publisher. That's one of the parts of the magic here of the framework, is that publishers and platforms won't have to have unique point-to-point agreements. The closest is the publisher puts in some metadata for platforms to retrieve, but there isn't a direct data feed or direct interaction there.
And will it be easier or not feasible, like easier for bigger publishers, less easy for smaller, but still feasible to implement this framework?
Yeah, good question. Presuming that smaller publishers still make use of service providers that generate their PDFs and provide delivery services, those services could still be updated. It's routine to inject metadata into PDFs. There's freeware tools if smaller publishers do it themselves to enable this. So it's this is not new or specialized technology. It's been around for a long time.
So it looks like all elements are there really to move on with this, at least from the publisher side. Will anything happen if some publishers decide not to go ahead with this, or to wait to act? Do you have any views on that? This is very new, of course. So we'll see in the next months the effective rollouts. But what could happen if publishers don't decide to go this way?
Yeah, Esther, do you want to take that, or you want me to answer that one?
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. If publishers don't act, I think it weakens the framework overall, but nothing bad will happen. Platforms will have an indication that the content just may not be shared at all. So that's the conclusion that they would reach if the platforms are using the framework. If a publisher puts nothing into Crossref or puts nothing into their PDF, then the platforms will deduce nothing can be shared.
Did you want to add anything to that, or Mathilde?
I think perhaps to make things a bit clearer, I mean, right now, publishers for subscription content, they don't deposit any license information. So platforms would then just find a copyright statement, no license information, like there's not a Creative Commons license, and then can have to assume that it's a subscription article that's protected by copyright, and they just have to conclude that they can't share it, right? So with the article sharing framework, they communicate to platforms that there might be some sharing possible. And perhaps Mathilde, you might have some additional comments from like, okay, what happens if publishers don't get involved?
Well, I mean, I can certainly answer probably in a more general way related to the obligation of Article 17. So the great thing about this Article 17, at least the part we focused on today, is that it's really allowing a collaboration between platforms and publishers in our case. So if you submit the relevant and necessary information via one of the means that is possible, nothing is mandated, the ISF being one solution for the academic world, then the platform needs to make best effort to remove the content. So it allows them to take that very in a proactive and preemptive way, as we said earlier. However, even so, like Article 17 is a binding obligation for the platforms. Obviously, they have to respect anything that is said in Article 17. If publishers don't act in a general way, so they do not send the relevant and necessary information, then the platform cannot make its best effort basically to remove the content. It is true that and nothing in the Article 17.4 precludes publisher to still send substantiated notice to take down content. So irrespective of whether a publisher does send relevant and necessary information for the purpose of this proactive, preemptive part of Article 17, they are obliged still to take down the content and to prevent the future occurrence of content. But what this offers is that it offers a really great possibility for publishers to do that, you know, while removing the legal uncertainty and to have a very rationalized, streamlined way. In the case of the ISF, also an open source, a very low cost, if not zero cost, to do so.
Dan, do you want to still add anything? I saw you're muting, that's why I'm asking. No, because I think otherwise this was loads of information really from all sides about what the framework is, why it's there, what is expected, what's the technology behind. It's really a lot. So maybe we can leave the audience with this, but as said, we will have a dedicated section on the website. We have an email set up that you can send any queries to. Any one of us on the panel today can be contacted. And anyway, as Esther also mentioned, this is really the first rock that we throw. There'll be more coming. More events will be soon coming to your calendar. We will have an agenda set up with really technical workshops that especially the technical team in your publishing houses can follow to see how to actually implement all of this. So we have a couple of ideas of how we can help our members, but also other publishers really to get on with this. But we're also keen on hearing your feedback as to what you think could be helpful for this. So we have a very final poll that I would ask Joe to launch now. There you go. So what types of future engagement would you find helpful regarding the STM article sharing framework? it's helpful for us if we hear from the audience where to go, where to focus our energies, what kind of communications, documents might be helpful. So people are still voting. And then, of course, if you have any other ideas that are not here in the multiple choices, do reach out. I think we've been quite clear that we're available for any kind of feedback from your side. So I would say the 5 seconds that we can give. Yeah, there you go. So detailed examples or use cases, yeah, I think that might really be lots of information needs to come together in a concrete picture at some point. We'll be happy to do so, and hopefully with time, I think even for us at the beginning it was all far more blurred than it is today. So hopefully with time it will get easier and clearer for everybody, and just come to be the standard that we see it being in the SCM sector. With that, we'll be very happy to connect again soon. But for now, we'll give it back to Joe. Thank you very much to all of you for being on the panel. I think it's been really, really helpful and clear. And we've got a session coming up, but I also see that Ian's come on, so maybe you want to say a couple of words before we move on to the next session.
I was just going to say that the next session is due at 12:30 EST, 5:30 BST. So perhaps if people take a little break, because I think some people will be coming directly at that time, so I don't want to start it before they're here. So have a little break and we'll see you back at 1:30. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks all.
Hello and welcome back. And thanks to those who've either come back or stayed through and stayed till the bitter end. And welcome indeed to Charlie. Charlie Rappel's the co-founder and chief customer officer for Kudos, which was launched in 2013 to help researchers ensure their publications get found, read, and cited. And last month, Kudos published Brave New World. Sorry. Scholarly information after COVID, a study that was supported by STM amongst others that provides data and insights into how COVID-19 has affected scholarly communications, from emerging opportunities to recommendations for strategic and tactical responses. And so during this session, Charlie will be presenting the finding from the study, and hopefully we will have a good session here and some good information. We welcome Charlie and thank you very much for doing this. Fire away.
Thanks, Ian. Hello, everyone. As Ian said, I'm going to talk about the study, but it was a massive piece of work. So what I've done is just pick out a few of the juiciest findings. And we undertook the study because we were aware that obviously the virus was disrupting research substantially and potentially acting as a catalyst for changes that might have been coming anyway. And in that context, it was obvious that publishers and societies and providers of related services, all of us in this sector, were going to need some urgently fresh intelligence and analysis, both to shape our kind of immediate and short-term responses, but also to give us that insight as to what we should be doing longer term, or what we could expect longer term. So yes, thank you to STM, who were one of the supporters of the study, and thank you to all the sponsors. It was also sponsored by Cactus, the Royal Society of Chemistry, Wiley, American Chemical Society, American Society for Microbiology, BMJ, and CARGA. So thank you for everybody. These collaborative studies work really well, but they do need a group of people to come together. So we're always very grateful for that. And as you can see, it was a substantial bit of work. As I said, there was 2 massive surveys, over 10,000 researchers around the world, pretty representative actually in both subject area breakdown and kind of global breakdown as well, sort of broadly reflecting the breakdown of the overall research base. And then a study of 665 librarians also around the world and a range of career levels. And there was a secondary research piece where, alongside the surveys, my colleague Dr. Chris Daly and I were also reviewing hundreds of announcements and articles and other sort of documents and postings from funders and from institutions and from researchers. So it was a really comprehensive overview of what was happening kind of in real time and what the likely consequences were going to be. And we covered topics ranging from funder and university finances and income, through library budgets, cancellation decisions, open access policies, open access funds, also researcher career development, publishing experiences, and attendance at events. So it was really broad, and I'm just picking out kind of 3 headlines today, which is around library budgets. So I'll go into each of these in more detail, but the top level is 71% of our library respondents reported cuts in their libraries' budgets. 25% of those said their budget had been cut by 30% or more. And of course, they've also had to transform services and become completely remote operations overnight. In many cases, they had fewer staff to be able to do that with. And so the sort of upshot of that was that the decision-making processes around the priorities of what they would be doing or spending and the decisions around cancellations were being made more quickly and more ruthlessly than has typically been the case in the past. So we'll come back to all of that. Meanwhile, researchers, the findings showed that they're really concerned about the effect of the pandemic on their career, obviously. And this is both in terms of the effect of the pandemic on funding, but also, and perhaps even more, in terms of the loss of opportunities for networking and for building collaborations and for building their reputation. And then I think the events piece is interesting, particularly for today's audience. Both groups indicated a preference for virtual events going forward, and I think the likelihood of people attending in-person events is lower. So there are obviously implications for publishers, for all of us, in how we rethink or newly meet the objectives that we've previously met with physical conferences. So let me take you through some of the detail of that now. So this is the data when we asked librarians about their budget cuts. And this obviously took place in late 2020. So we were asking them kind of what had happened to that point in 2020, and then what did they anticipate for 21 and 22 and beyond. And among the various options they could choose was, I don't know. And you can see from the grey blocks here, there is quite a high level of uncertainty among the respondents, and that grows as we look further ahead. So what I've done here in the columns that I've just added on the right is to take out the grey blocks. So I've removed the data for the respondents who said, I don't know, just to look only at the people who were able to give a figure, which makes it easier to kind of see how the cuts are being distributed in those cases. And so when you break it down and look at it like that, that's where you can see that 71% indicated there had been cuts on some level in their library, and 25% of those who were able to give a figure said that their library budget had been cut by 30% or more. And that was in 2020. It was expected to be around 27%, or that figure was to grow to 27% this year. And then that figure of people who were saying 30% or more is expected to drop back to 20% for 2022 and beyond. So what that sort of implies is a significant short-term impact, but hopefully some hope for future recovery. Although when we're over in the 2022 column, that is now only 200, so about a third of our respondents by this time who were able to give us any kind of figure. So obviously we need to adjust our confidence in that figure accordingly. So we asked which areas of library budgets were most likely to be affected. And in that we offered them 11 options, from collections and open access funds to facilities and equipment and staff and things. And the two substantially more common areas, well, the areas most likely to be cut, were events and collections. And obviously both of those are significant for us here. Events are still a major channel for library sales and marketing. And then obviously collections is the content that they buy from us. So we then asked them about the likelihood of cancellation across different content areas and types. And there were 8 options there from which they were choosing. And again, the most at-risk content types, as you'd expect, I think, were print books, one-off purchases, primary resources. We asked them about the criteria by which cancellation decisions would be made. And in that question, we had 12 options, and the most commonly selected, again, by quite some margin, were overall cost, cost per use, overall usage. Which I think reminds us that if we've got 70% of libraries having had budget cuts and they're going to start making cancellation decisions based on usage and cost per use, we need to keep prioritizing activities that drive usage. And we asked about price freezes and whether a commitment to a 0% price increase would help to protect subscriptions. And in that case, we had 6 options, and we gave them the opportunity to select all that apply. So acknowledging that it might not be a one-size-fits-all. But a quarter of the library respondents said a price freeze would guarantee a renewal. So that was the only option they selected. And a further 10% said that a price freeze would sometimes be enough to ensure a renewal. So that is encouraging, and I think shows, well, it's both a strong encouragement to us to commit to some 0% price rises. And I think it also reflects that librarians are keen to protect whatever content they can in order to continue providing the best possible service to patrons and users. And then finally on this topic, we looked at librarians' expectations around whether and when budgets might return to normal. A lot of complexity in actually the responses here, but to kind of boil it down, the sort of simple takeaway from that was that 60%-ish of librarians were more in the kind of optimistic camp that eventually budgets will recover, but a lot of detail behind that in the overall report and analysis. Obviously, the budget cuts are affecting more than just content and collections. And as I said, librarians reported having had to transform services, reassigning staff to different roles, expanding staff's skills and responsibilities. And I think the effect of this pressure, this extra kind of workload and so on, is quite helpfully summarized in this comment from one of the respondents who said, decisions are being taken much more quickly, and what would once have had to go through a series of committees is now being decided and actioned in a single discussion, which might have some benefits, but also I think creates an environment where there's less leeway in negotiations. And I think this sort of streamlined decision making came to mind when I was reviewing these other comments that came through in the library survey. I think we can see that the kind of rumbling issues over the last few years around ebook and e-textbook pricing have really come to a head in the pandemic, because libraries have had to move to 100% electronic provision almost overnight. And I think when we had asked them what proportion of that provision had been electronic before, I think it was 40%. So it was a big, big shift. And I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of publishers' pricing and licensing models were not quite ready for that sudden 100% electronic provision. So the comments that came from the librarians in the survey ranged from this kind of more collegiate at the top here, publishers need to have more realistic purchasing models, to those who are kind of suspecting publishers' motives in this area. So the profiteering going on in this area is shocking. And then also those who are already kind of taking practical steps in favour of more flexible and affordable models. So the final comment here, pre-pandemic, we would buy 10 print copies of each edition. This model isn't reflected in any way with e-textbooks. And as a result, we are now liaising with lecturers to change the books on reading lists for those that have unlimited user licenses at a realistic one-off price. So although, as I was just saying, our findings about budget cuts imply that librarians are keen to avoid cancellations and protect content if possible, I think it's also fair to say that tolerance for kind of complicated pricing models or licensing terms is low. And I think that there is a real need to acknowledge and address that. And I do think, to be fair, that likely some of the sort of more egregious price quotes that were seen as profiteering, I suspect that will be often the result of kind of outdated pricing models in which the electronic copies may have been the exception, or it's part of a kind of print and electronic deal. And I hope that's the case, that it hasn't been profiteering. It's just been that the pricing structures just haven't caught up with the pace at which the market evolved here. So I think there's a real opportunity here to engage with libraries and or in librarians, update pricing models in a relatively collaborative way. I think it's a tipping point. So this could be a sort of defining moment in which relationships are strengthened through that sort of collaboration in adversity. or it's going to be a moment where kind of tone deafness and inadequate strategic responses could lead to irreparable damage or long-term damage to relationships and to brands, and ultimately then to the bottom line. Right, time is flying. So let's move on to researchers. 58% worried that the pandemic was going to have a negative effect on their career. As I said, this boiled down to concerns about funding. So 74% thought it was going to be harder to win grants. 56% thought the overall level of funding was going to be negatively affected. And they also reported concerns about the lack of networking opportunities and how that would affect their reputation, their profile, their ability to find collaborators, their overall career development. Another aspect of the researcher findings that I wanted to highlight is the way the pandemic is further disadvantaging already disadvantaged groups. So you'll have seen some of the studies last year that showed a fall in submissions that had a female lead author. And we had sort of new insights and new data around this as well. So we asked, among loads of other things, about how the pandemic was affecting the time researchers were spending on a range of professional tasks. And in this example, 39% of respondents said they had less time for conducting research as a result. And when we then looked at the different demographic groups, we could see that female respondents had been more adversely affected than male respondents, and that Black and Indigenous and people of colour have been more adversely affected than white people, and that early career respondents have been more adversely affected than those at more established career levels. And so I think in terms of the relevance of this for publishers, there's some insights here that encourage us to redouble and maybe review and refresh, refocus some of our efforts to support disadvantaged and underrepresented groups. So it might mean more purposefully expanding representation in prestige roles like editorial boards. It might be about actually exploring the skills gaps and how they may differ among some of these different groups, and then providing kind of support and training about things like peer review or whatever that really address the specific skills gaps in different groups. And in that sort of context, we also asked respondents about which types of support and services they would see themselves needing in the next 12 months. So there were some really useful insights here in terms of both strategic and commercial opportunities for better supporting researchers. And the full report, full data has a lot of detail in terms of the demographics where particular services might be particularly popular. But the headlines here are that researchers need services to support writing up research, preparing and submitting manuscripts, increasing visibility both among academics and the wider public. Right, racing to the finish. If I can get my slide to move forward. So final snippet was around events. Across both librarians and researchers, we found that 1/3 expect that they will only attend events if they're online going forward. 1/5 expect that most of the events they attend would be online. And actually 12%, 13 expect to attend more events because they can do so online. So sort of one way or another, about 70% indicated not only an acceptance of, but actually a preference for online events. And I think this stood out because I feel like we've kind of been watching and waiting and assuming that events will get back to normal once the pandemic is over. But actually, I think we're kind of actually at a watershed moment here as well, where although many of the kind of virtual events so far have had to be quite quickly sort of cobbled together and have ended up sort of being more an attempt to replicate online an event that was designed to be physical, even despite that maybe not being optimal, they've worked better than people expected. And I think there have been benefits in terms of the way they kind of fit better into our lives when we can do it virtually, or they're more affordable, or more accessible to wider audiences, or more international. And although, you know, researchers did point out their concerns about lost opportunities for networking and for being able to communicate their work, I think those sort of shortcomings are not a weakness of the virtual event medium in and of itself. It's more a result of the pace at which the events had to be sort of shoehorned from a physical one into a virtual one. And so I think there's a really interesting opportunity here to kind of reimagine, redesign our events to be virtual first from the ground up. And it's just a gap waiting to be filled at the moment. And there's an immediate opportunity potentially to kind of gain first mover advantage in both a brand sense and a commercial sense by pivoting quickly and innovatively to that kind of virtual first environment. But that's a root and branch review. So I think we need to get back to thinking about what objectives have we been trying to meet in terms of our attendance or our sponsorship and exhibition at researcher events and library events. What objectives are those delegates themselves, the libraries and the researchers trying to meet? And what would be new ways of trying to meet those if we were starting again from scratch, rather than trying to get thousands of people into one city for a few days? So I think this is a really interesting moment, and there's lots to be gained here by approaching this afresh, but it's going to mean a different skill set, probably different approaches to how we resource and allocate our budgets and so on, because delivering a compelling online experience or a virtual event experience is likely more about sort of content and curation and thought leadership and things, and very different to the kind of logistical management of delivering a physical event. So loads more thoughts and recommendations on that in the research, but that's the end of my time today. So I've barely scratched the surface, but thank you for having me. Link here if you want to find out more about that project.
Thank you so much, Charlie, and we've reflected a lot on this, on the themes you were talking about right at the end there about events. I certainly think that the potential for participation and more equitable participation in events is a really important one, and we think about them very differently now, and we don't mind having 3 kind of different themes in a day, because it's for people to drop in and drop out and as they wish, and of course the massive reduction in traveling costs means that I think again more people in our membership can attend and interact, and I think those are things that should not be lost. Thank you ever so much. Thanks to all our speakers today. I mean, there was a fascinating insight into the current situation there, Charlie, but the pandemic continues, I suppose, to dominate our lives in the background, and certainly we still see terrible scenes that don't fail to shock, and I think we all hope and really hope and pray, I suppose, that we can get out of this situation, and others can as well, and that the world can open back up again. But things will never be quite the same. Thanks to all our speakers, to Sari, Dan, Juan and Don, to Mathilde, Esther and Dan, and again to Susie and Claudia for sharing and keeping everything perfectly to time. And thanks to you all for attending. It's great that we can open up these events to people from outside the membership. And it's been a really good turnout, and thanks to those that have tuned in today. And we hope to continue to collaborate and problem solve together with those from outside of the publishing community and those that attended today and some of those sessions. Tomorrow is Innovations Day and the launch of both STM Trends 2025, which was formerly known as Tech Trends, and the white paper on AI ethics in STM publishing. And so I think Joe won't be very happy, but if you register now, I'm sure you can come for all our parts, and we'll love to see you back. Please keep looking at the STM events page for other upcoming events and in our regular membership matters. And thanks again to Joe for managing the event, and thanks to you all. Goodbye, and have a nice afternoon, evening, wherever you may be.